Sometimes breaking a generational cycle looks nothing like success. It might look like being the first person in your family to ask a question everybody else avoided, the first to admit you don't know something, the first to go to therapy, the first to talk openly about money, the first to write a will, the first to buy life insurance before somebody gets sick, the first to stop treating struggle like it's a family tradition. And here's the part I've been thinking about. Sometimes being the first is actually pretty lonely because everybody celebrates the result. They celebrate the degree, the house, the business, the promotion, the money. What they don't always see is the uncomfortable part where somebody had to decide what happened before me doesn't have to keep happening after me. That's what I want to talk about today. Because we use phrases like breaking generational cycles and generational wealth all the time, but I think we've reduced something enormous into a conversation mostly about money, and it's much bigger than that. When people hear generational wealth, they usually think about assets, property, investment, business, money being passed from one generation to another. And yes, all of that matters. But before you can build generational wealth, sometimes you have to address generational instability. Because families pass down more than money. We pass down habits. We pass down beliefs. We pass down our fears. We pass down what nobody taught us. We pass down what we learned simply by watching. And sometimes we pass down survival. For a lot of families, especially families that have historically had less access to wealth, financial education, property ownership, affordable insurance, quality credit, and other resources, survival itself became a skill. You learn how to make something out of nothing, how to stretch $20, how to help somebody when you don't really have enough yourself, how to figure things out. There's strength in that. But there's also a question worth asking. Do the people after us have to become experts at surviving the same things? Because resilience is beautiful, but so is not needing it every single day. Breaking a generational cycle can mean deciding, my children shouldn't have to recover from this. Or, my spouse shouldn't have to figure this out alone. Or, my family shouldn't have to start from zero every time something happens. And even if you don't have children, this still applies. Legacy is not limited to parenthood. You can leave siblings better positioned, a spouse, nieces and nephews, friends, a community, people you mentor, people who watched how you moved through the world. Generational impact can travel through more than blood. And here's where I think people get discouraged. They think breaking cycles requires becoming wealthy first. It doesn't. You can make six figures and still repeat destructive patterns. And you can be nowhere near wealthy yet and already be changing the trajectory of your family. Sometimes breaking a cycle is learning how credit works because nobody explained it to you. Sometimes it's opening your first retirement account. Sometimes it's having an emergency fund even if there's only a few $100s in it right now. Sometimes it's getting comfortable talking about debt and planning. Sometimes it's establishing boundaries. Sometimes it's learning to ask for help before it becomes a crisis. Sometimes it's putting important documents somewhere another person can actually find them. Sometimes it's finally saying, we're going to talk about this in my house. That's progress. And before I go deeper, if conversations like this are valuable to you, subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you get notified when I post. And while you're here, like this video, leave a comment, and share it with somebody who might need this conversation. Because sometimes the first step toward changing something is simply getting people to talk about it. Now here's where this connects directly to what I do. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about life insurance is because, backed by my years of claims expertise in this industry, I've seen what happens at the intersection of grief and money. Death doesn't wait for a family to become financially prepared, and grief doesn't stop the mortgage. It doesn't stop the rent. It doesn't stop the childcare. It doesn't stop the groceries. It doesn't stop somebody from asking how the funeral is going to be paid for. That's where something like life insurance becomes bigger than a financial product. It becomes a transfer of responsibility. You're essentially saying, if something happens to me, I don't want every financial responsibility I carry to immediately become yours. That is a form of cycle breaking. But I want to be careful here. Buying life insurance by itself does not create generational wealth. And I don't like when people oversell it that way, quite frankly. Life insurance is a tool. Depending on the policy and the situation, it can provide money for income replacement, debt, final expenses, estate liquidity, business needs, or simply giving a family financial breathing room after someone dies. But the bigger strategy is preparation. Think about two families. In both families, somebody passes away unexpectedly. Both families are devastated. Money cannot change that. But family A has no idea what to do. Nobody knows whether there is insurance. Nobody knows where their documents are. There's very little savings. The family starts collecting money. Someone uses a credit card. Someone misses work. Another relative takes on expenses they weren't prepared for. And grief now has a financial emergency attached to it. Family B is grieving too, but there's a plan. Someone knows where the documents are. Beneficiaries are current and up to date. There's life insurance appropriate for that family's needs. There are instructions. There may be savings. There may be a will or other estate planning documents where appropriate. Nobody is celebrating. Somebody still died. But the family has room to grieve without every decision becoming a financial crisis. That's what preparation can do. And sometimes breaking a generational cycle is as simple and as difficult as making sure the next emergency doesn't become the same emergency your family has experienced before. There's another side to this that doesn't get talked about enough. Breaking cycles can be uncomfortable because sometimes you're changing behaviors that your family considers normal. Maybe nobody talks about money. You start talking about money. Maybe everybody waits until there's an emergency. You start planning before one. Maybe nobody knows what anybody owns or owes. You start documenting things. Maybe every generation has depended entirely on the next generation to figure out funeral expenses. You decided that that ends with you. That doesn't mean you're better than anybody who came before you. I actually think that's important to say. Previous generations made decisions with the information, opportunities, resources, and circumstances available to them. Sometimes they survived things we will never fully understand. The goal isn't to look backward and assign blame. The goal is to look forward and assume responsibility. That's different. And responsibility doesn't mean perfection either. You might be the person breaking a cycle while you're still figuring out your own life. You might have debt. You might be rebuilding credit. You might not own a home. You might not have a huge investment account. You might be starting your career over. You might feel behind. That does not disqualify you. The question isn't, have I already arrived? The question is, am I leaving better systems behind than the ones that I inherited? That's a completely different measurement of success. Maybe your parents couldn't leave you an inheritance. Can you leave the next generation financial knowledge? Maybe nobody taught you about insurance. Can you make sure the people around you understand it? Maybe you inherited financial anxiety, but can you create financial conversations? Maybe you inherited silence around debt. Can you create a plan? Maybe you inherited the expectation that everybody just figures it out. Can you leave instructions? Maybe you can't leave somebody $1 million. Can you leave them better positioned than you were? And I think that matters particularly for communities where wealth hasn't always had an uninterrupted path from one generation on to the next. You cannot change history, but you can influence what gets handed forward from your chapter. Maybe you're not the generation that finishes everything. Maybe you're the generation that starts it. The first homeowner, the first investor, the first business owner, the first person with adequate life insurance, the first person with an estate plan, the first person who teaches the younger people that you had to learn through mistakes, the first person who says, we're not starting over again. Somebody has to go first, and going first rarely feels glamorous while you're doing it. So, if you want to know what breaking generational cycles actually looks like, it looks like preparation, education, boundaries, ownership, communication, protection, documentation, planning, and making decisions today that somebody else may benefit from years after you made them. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes nobody even notices you're doing it, but eventually someone gets to start from where you finished instead of starting where you started. And that's the point. So here's the question I want to leave you with. What is one thing your family has historically had to struggle through that you don't want the people after you to struggle through the same way? Put that in the comments. Not because we need to expose every detail of our families, but because I think there's power in identifying the thing we're intentionally trying to change. And if this conversation made you think, like it and share it with somebody you care about. If you are thinking about specifically financial protection and you want to review your life insurance options, get a quote, or schedule a consultation, you'll find those resources in the description. And subscribe and click the notification bell if you want to continue these conversations with me, because building a legacy doesn't always start with having more. Sometimes it starts with deciding what reached me doesn't automatically get to reach everybody after me. I am Jasmón Clayton. Keep pushing, stay curious, and always move forward.